I would take all the stuff that came out of the kiln and then be like, okay, now I've got to sell that. And that division was really big for me to not have to think about selling anymore and just letting Maker Tim make. And that made me more productive.
What is up, Shaping Nation? This is Nick Torres here. And on this episode, this is the second part of my interview with Tim C. And we are talking all about how Tim makes his pottery and his process and his thought process and how he breaks things down to make things easier for himself. I hope you guys enjoyed this part, and I'll see you guys in there. So let's talk about your pottery. In one sentence, can you tell me what you make?
I make grungy industrial pots.
I love it. That was a perfect answer for that.
I could probably have like 10 different taglines. Like grungy industrial pots, like wood brown. Just one word, brown. That would be just brown. Unlikely domestic ware.
These are all great sentences, so right to the point. I love that. So tell me a story how you started making these pots that you make today.
Again, there's a short, long version, or long, short version. I was doing, I guess, what some would consider, or at least what I'd been told, were very feminine pots. You know, they were frilly, they were light pastel colors. And early Tim had thought that's what people wanted to buy. And well, we're going to time out. There are different Tims that live in Mr. Tim's brain. There's Maker Tim, there's Seller Tim, there's Marketing Tim, there's Teacher Tim. There's lots of different Tims. And I didn't know I had those Tims in me early on. It was all just glumped in one. So Maker Tim and Seller Tim and all that were working together. They didn't have any separation or compartmentalization. It was all just crammed into one thing. So Seller Tim had thought that, Seller Tim needs to make things that people are going to buy. And doing shows early on, there were more women at shows. You know, if I had to take like a counter of how many women were at a show versus men, it was probably 80-20. So Marketing and Seller Tim said, we need to market to women. And it was a mistake. That wasn't what I should have done, but that's what Marketing and Seller Tim had thought. So I was making feminine sort of work, and people would come in and go, that looks like an oil can and stuff. And that all came from a graduate student's assignment that I had in a class. But I don't know how far back you want to go. Do you want to go back that far?
Let's go.
Well,
let's go.
So we're going to name drop Jeff Schwartz. He's a great guy. He was a grad student at Syracuse University. And in the summer program, he said he had an assignment, and it was make a cream and sugar set. And I said, okay, I'm going to make bottles and vases. That's what I made. I would make 200 a week. That was just my jam. I liked making them. And he'd go, Tim, you're going to fail if you don't make a cream and sugar set. Right on, I'm going to make that. And I made more bottles and stuff. And I got to like the end of the semester, and he's like, Tim, I can't pass you if you don't have a cream and sugar set. And I go, okay. So I went home and I threw more bottles. And it was like 2 days before I had to hand them in. And I pause and I will get a piece. So they were bottles. Okay, stop right. Okay. They were bottles like this, where, we had curved spouts. Some of them had shorter necks, and some of them had, were jars, but they were all pretty much bottle type forms. And I was sitting in a basement of a rental property that we were in. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to make a cream and sugar set out of all these bottles? Because I don't have time to throw them now. So I had a lot. So I just started cutting them apart. I was cutting them off at the side here. I was cutting the necks off. I was cutting jars apart. And eventually, and do you have the ability to input a picture? Is that
I can do that.
Yeah, so maybe ask me later to put the picture in here. It was a cream and sugar set that was made of all the parts of these little vases that I was making. The top part, like the body of the piece, was the upper section. The spout was a neck. The part that you would fill it was the top of a vase. The sugar bowl was pretty much one of these cut. And then the top of a jar was attached sideways, so you could, the lid and everything was assembly onto it. And he really liked that. He was jazzed about it. And somebody at college was actually excited about something that I did. Nobody really liked me there. And so having somebody excited about my work was like, woo, I'm going to do that all the time. So I made a bunch of those. And I got into the Sika student show for one of my cream and sugar sets. And after that, it was like, okay, people enjoy that. It's something I can market. If if Nsika people like it, then other people are going to like it. And I continued that when I started doing shows. And people did like it. They sold well. People enjoyed them. I made enough money on them. But people would say, "Oh, those look like tin cans," or not tin cans. They look like oil cans. And then, some of the stoners in Albany would go, "Is this like a pipe or a bong?" Or there would be things like that. And eventually, after hearing that enough, I was at an antique show, and I have it here. I saw a set of oil can kind of things, and I bought them. I think there were 5, and I said, I'm going to make them. And I tried. And it was like probably about 6 years of trying to replicate oil cans before I really got one done enough that I felt. And sometimes that's up on that shelf. It's not up there now. That it felt like an oil can. And it took a lot of technological changes into my process to make that happen, to get the spouts the way I wanted and everything. But when that happened, I was really excited about it, again, because it's the opposite of all the stuff I was doing, right? I was making very feminine kind of stuff, and this was all grungy, dirty, horrible, crunchy, ugly stuff. And at the same time, we also built a wood kiln, and I was invited to do my first solo show. At the time, it was, what was it? It's Flower City in Rochester now, but it was something else, and I don't remember. But it was my first solo show, so I was like, I'm going to make all this special work for it. And I made these oil cans, and I made my porcelain stuff, and I made raku work, and I made wood firework. It was like 4 different things. The show was Evolution and Division. And from that, I made a series of oil cans that I was really jazzed about. So much so that the money that I made at that solo show, I put in towards investment. I invested it into future endeavors, and I applied to the Smithsonian Craft Show. And I accidentally got in. After I applied, I forgot all about it. It was an expensive, it might have been like a $60 application fee at the time, when most of them were like 10 or 20. And I was at a shift in a wood firing, and I'm like, I got an email, picked it up on the phone. I'm like, what the hell is the Smithsonian Craft Show? And I kind of forgot about it. And it was maybe a couple weeks later, they're like, we need confirmation on whether or not you plan on attending. And I'm like, I guess I need to look this up. And it's like, oh crap, I'm way over my head. But it was like 8 months away, so I had time to make work for it. And I got in for oil cans. So I had 8 months solid of banging out worthy pots, something that I thought, because I'm looking at the people that did it the year before and have done it, and like these are people that are mid to end career pottery people, ceramic people. And they're awesome. I did not fit in. Imposter syndrome, before it was a thing, was heavy. So I spent the 8 months, trying to bring my work up to a level that I thought would be worthy of, a show like that. And after 8 months of doing oil cans and oil can type projects, the show was okay. It wasn't any better than, if I had done the same amount of time and energy show-wise as a local show. But I got to say I did the Smithsonian show. Oh, look at me. Super fancy. It was financially, it wasn't worth it. In the end, it was the same as any other show. But it gave me a time frame to work on something solely as one thing. Typically, I was working on 10 different kinds of things at the same time. So focusing everything on one aspect of, the stuff that I was doing was both transformative in that I got to grow a lot, because it was transformative in that I got to do a bunch of stuff in one genre of my work for an extended period of time. But it was also really limiting in that I didn't get to do anything else that I was excited about doing. So as soon as that show was over, I was done with oil cans. I'm like, no oil cans. I want to just make pots again. And I just sat down in the studio and threw pots, just like, I kind of say it's like I'm shitting them out of my hands, just like a laser beam of pots coming out of my hands. And, I had a cabinet that I could fit probably 100 pots in, and I filled it. And I'm like, they're boring. And that's where like Maker Tim and Seller Tim kind of divided. And Maker Tim was like, I want to be able to just make whatever I want, however I want to make it, as many as I want to make. And I don't want to have to be beholden to Seller Tim, because It doesn't matter what you do. I spent 8 months on this work. I put everything I could into it, and I didn't do any better than if I had done something else during that same time. I could have done any other kinds of pots and done the same business. If I just want to think of it like as a business thing, I would have done the same. So I tried to separate Maker Tim and Seller Tim. So every time Maker Tim went in the studio, he did whatever he wanted. Doesn't matter. Tim wants to make mugs? Sure, Tim makes mugs. Tim wants to make more mugs? Tim makes more mugs. Tim wants to spend 2 months making mugs? He's going to make the mugs. Seller Tim, then when it, would have to take all the shit that came out of the kiln. Oh no, see, started the shit train. I would take all the stuff that came out of the kiln and then be like, okay, now I've got to sell that. And that division was really big for me to not have to think about selling anymore and just letting Maker Tim make. And that made me more productive. It made me a heck of a lot happier. And because of that, I was able to make bigger steps. Like let's say like if we have like a step and you're making work, you've got a normal 4-inch rise. You're going up 4 inches at a time. But when you're really excited about something, you can skip steps. You're just running up. You're like, I'm not drinking water. I'm just going to run up these stairs. And you're going like 8 steps at a time. And you're just running up these steps. And you get to the top and you're happy. And that was a big change for me in the studio and stuff. And that gets us to the decorating. So when I started doing just the simple pots again and just being excited to throw rather than, doing all this planning because I had this end goal that I wanted and just sitting down and throwing, I had a lot of pots to decorate without impunity. If I messed up a decoration or I didn't like it, I had 100 other pots I could decorate. So it didn't matter. I screw one up, I could toss it, I could fire it, doesn't matter. I could make another one, it's no big deal. So I started just painting. I took apart a typewriter and I started illustrating the parts of the typewriter. Have you ever taken apart a typewriter?
I have not.
A lot of parts. There's so many parts. And they were all really cool parts. So you take apart, you illustrate it on a mug. And then, like I said, somebody comes in the studio and goes, why do you have, what is that? And I go, it's this typewriter part. And you wiggle it around and like, look at it. It wiggles like, this is awesome. And like, but why is it on a pot? And I'm like, I don't know. And then you go, okay, now I got to think about why these are on the pots. And just sitting down there in the studio at Clayscapes, and I had my own little room. It was small. It was like a 10 by 12 kind of space. And I was looking at my stuff. And I'm like, okay, what's in the studio? And there were paint cans and there were buckets. Outside of the door, there was like a big drum for sweeping compound. And I had a wrench that the family story was grandfather stole it from Carrier. It's like this big crescent wrench. And I had all these things. And I'm like, oh, let's just make something with them. And I just sat and I painted a robot. And as soon as like I had put the last like of the robot, somebody goes, why are you painting robots? And I'm like, I don't know. like there's all these stuff. I just made a robot with it. And they're like, but why a robot? And I said, well, this robot is killing the last bug on Earth. And they're like, well, why? They're like, why is it killing the last bug on Earth? And I'm like, because all the living things on Earth destroyed it, right? Humans destroyed it. They can't make that change. They think all living things are bad and are going to ruin the Earth. So, it's killing the last living thing. And they're like, but why? And that's where it all started. So from that point, that little conversation, I've created a whole, illustrative story that's now probably 14, 13 years of every piece that I illustrate being a part of that story. And it's been a great way to, visually discuss things that I think are usually hard to, like if I drew people and it was about environmentalism and people, I think it's a lot harder for people to like get into that and empathize with the characters because it's us that are destroying the world, or it's us that are causing war, and it's us that are greedy and everything. But if we do it as robots, like, oh, that robot's shitty. Look at him. He's taking all the money. He's got all the power, and he's just being mean to all the little robots. But in the end, that's us. So hopefully internalizing it through like a surrogate sort of, that we could see ourselves as robots, but really, it's just robots as a little drawing. And it's been a way for me to deal with my world locally, in the studio, in my yard, in my community, as a way to kind of reflect and deal with complex subjects that are harder to like write about or discuss with. I just do it all through little drawings of robots.
So that does bring me actually into my next question. So
Okay.
you are inspired by your part of the world. Can you explain to me how this impacts your pottery?
Yeah, everything. So I think some of my favorite things I've drawn have been directly from my yard. One of the things, like my wife had a brain injury, and the second one that she had, she wasn't able to drive. And her car had sat undriven for a couple months, and it needed to get driven. So went out to like move it so that, the brakes didn't get froze up or anything. And on it had been a spider that had been there for about a month. It was an orb weaver, and it had gotten pretty big. And I'd watched it because, it made a web from the mirror to the window. And I said, eventually, I'm going to have to move you. So I waited for it was out, and I got a stick. And all the sticks that I draw in my pottery world now, like anytime I draw a stick, it's that stick. And I took the stick, and I got him on the stick, and I brought him to the garden where I grow pickles. Cucumbers, I guess some people call them. And I put it in the pickle garden, and I watched that for the rest of the fall until, it died, and I found its little dead body. But all those kind of things led up to, all the spider drawings and like it being part of the story of the robots and the stick and all those kind of things. So like it's a direct representation of my world onto my pots. And I try to do that with all the things. Like I don't pick a motif necessarily because I think it's going to be marketable or that I don't know, why do people pick things? Like I think most of the time people pick things because they think it's going to sell or they might have an interest in it. I try to pick things that I directly have contact with. So if I'm doing a flower on one of my pots, I'm going out to my garden and I'm picking or cutting that flower or leaving it in place, taking a picture of it. But I'm using that exact thing that's in my yard. And a lot of times it'll be, a direct photo that I took of one of the flowers that I put on my pot. Like if they're like, oh, well, where'd you get that picture of that flower? Did you buy it as a stencil or something? No, like here's the photo of it in my garden. Like that is what happened right there. Like I grew it. I put the little seeds in. They made the flower that, I made the garden bed that grew the flower that, I did all of it. So it's like part of my world. And I guess that connection for me is just as important as anything else. Otherwise, I'm utilizing somebody else's or like a different story than my own. So drawing right from the things that I have direct contact with that are part of my world are, it means more. Like hawks, like right now I've got the family of hawks that are murdering all my bird friends. And, I've watched this family of hawks and it's been a part of my storyline for about 3 years now. But now they become murderous little bastards. They're killing all of my little bird friends. Like the other morning, John Cusack is one of the Rob. Well, it's probably not John Cusack anymore, but John Cusack was a female robin that was just really dumb. Like it just did dumb things all the time. Wherever it made a nest, it was like the worst place you could put a nest. So anytime I see a robin doing dumb stuff, it's John Cusack. So John Cusack was up in a tree, and I could hear it making hollers about predator stuff. And I went out to see what was going on, thinking there was a kitty cat or something. And nothing. I didn't see anything. And I got closer to the tree, and then a hawk came out, and the noises stopped. And I thought, oh man, the hawks took John Cusack. And later on, like I was a little disappointed in my hawk friends. But the next morning, I came out, and John Cusack was out there doing dumb stuff again. And I was like, oh, well, I didn't get John Cusack, but I got somebody. But it's so like that. I'm going to be illustrating, towards the end of summer, beginning of fall. Like that's going to be part of my storyline. Like that's going to be in the robot story, and it's going to reflect all the normal robot rules and all this stuff, but it's going to be incorporated.
I love that. I love that. Shaping Nation, if you could take experiences from your life, then you could apply that into your own pottery and you can literally have your own story and it could be your own story. I love that so much.
And everybody has stuff. I just happen to have a pickle garden and birds that I can look out and I can go, oh, that's that bird and that's that bird. And I understand them because they're in my world and I pay attention to them. If we pay attention to stuff, there's always things happening, whether it's the spider that lives in your basement, or your closet. Like I've got 2 spiders that live in my closet right now. They're both cellar spiders that somehow got upstairs, but like I know them. Like they're I think we call one Mr. Spider and one, I don't know what she calls the other one, but those are the 2 spiders in our world, and everybody has those 2 spiders. It's just how much attention are they giving to the things in the world? It could be, like I've had a slug that like would not leave my studio door alone. Like every night it would make another channel. I'd wash it and I'd let the slug would come back and it would make It would make a little line, and it was what it did. And one of my pots I drew, I would just keep replicating the lines it was doing on my window. And it's like, it can be minuscule little things if you're open to seeing those kind of stuff. So we all have it. It happens all the time. You're constantly exposed to input. It's just how much do you want that input to reflect into your work?
I love that so much. So now, can you explain to me how you create your pottery starting after you have thrown them on the wheel?
I'm going to need another cup of coffee. No. So in my studio, right, and it changes season to season. Like, and it can change week for week, but we'll go with this time right now. It's midsummer. Sometimes the air conditioning is on. Things I can stretch out the drying time a lot, and that usually gets me to make more complex forms, whether it's more complex mugs, oil cans, that kind of stuff. So I typically will start throwing on a Monday. Sunday is cards with grandma kind of stuff. So I try to get everything done by Sunday. So Monday I come into the studio and I'll throw all morning. I'll throw the parts for the oil cans. I'll throw the bases. I'll bury myself in stuff on Monday morning. And then Monday evening, I'll kind of make an evaluation of what other parts I'm going to need. So like I'll press mold pieces, I'll extrude handle bits. If there's nothing, like if there's no other things I need to make, I'll just throw more. And then Tuesday, I'll try to, manage drying so that things are getting finished up. And if I know there's going to be time for me to start more work before they're ready to get the next steps done, I'll throw more. Typically, I can get bowls done in a hurry. Like if I throw a bowl on Tuesday, I can usually finish it by Wednesday evening so that Thursday I am ready to start assembling whatever I'm doing, whether it's mugs or oil cans and stuff, so that I'm filling in all the little studio time that I have with things, concentrating more on the stuff that I started first and filling in what I think I can get done before I need to work on the other stuff. Whereas bowls are a good filler for me. The way they dry in the studio and management of them is really good. Things which I haven't done, soap dishes and spoon spas. We don't call them rests anymore. We want them to be luxurious for the spoons. Things like that I can fit in before. And then come Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'm making sure everything gets finished, whether it's the assembly or decorating and all that. So that Sunday morning, if I need to finish anything up, I can. And then Sunday afternoon, evening is family time, both my grandmas are still around, and I spend my time, playing cards and doing stuff with them. Sometimes I have to take Sundays off of that and make pots because I've buried myself too much. But I try to make sure I spend some fun times. I say fun times, but I love being in the studio. But if you're just in the studio, nobody remembers you exist. So I do have to show up to family stuff so they don't think I've been buried in the basement or anything. And then it starts again on Monday. There are some times, that I bite off more than I can chew, or something happens where I need to back up a little bit and actually mow the lawn, or I have with wood firing, there's a lot of prep that has to happen, and I don't always get to everything done in a week, and then it stretches out. But I try to work it back so that I start on the Monday again, so that I keep that cycle, because I understand it. I know the timing of it, and it's predictable for me. There have been times where I work willy-nilly, and then I end up getting way behind, or I'm having to make bad decisions to keep the pots done. Does that make sense? Like if I make 80 bowls and I can only finish 40 bowls in a week, now I've got 40 bowls that are going to get past their prime of when I should be working on them, and then I'm having to make bad decisions because I'm not hitting them at the right time. So I'm not putting the slip on at the right time, or I'm not underglazing them, or not stamping them. And then they become less and less what I want out of a pot, and more me accommodating them rather than them accommodating me. And I don't like when work ends up happening like that. So I try to keep the things on a cycle that I know I can be the best potter I could be at, so that I'm not having to make crappy pots.
Right. So can you tell me about, explain to me the actual assembly of the pots, how that process looks like?
Like the oil cans? Well,
yeah, we'll go with the oil cans.
Well, I use damp boxes. That's my thing. So in a damp box I have parts. And I will take a base. Actually, I'll take 8 or 6 bases, depending on how big they are at a time. And I'll put them on the table and I'll start laying out. I usually start with the best ones. So even though I'm making them all to the best quality that I can, there are some that just are a little better than another. And I usually I'll organize the boards by the best, the okayest, and like, okay. Like, so that the best ones get the best parts. So the things that I'm like most jazzed about will go on the best pieces. And I'll lay out all the parts that go with each of the pieces. And then I'll assemble them one by one. So I'm making, I'll take all the little parts that are made and I'll put them on that one. And that'll go on a board. And I'll just keep going down the line until I get all 8 or 6 done. And then go back in the damp box. And then do the next step on the next 8. And then this week I did a board of 6, a board of 8, and a board of 8. So I do them all. And then I put them back in the damp box. And then I do the next steps, which would be like handles and spouts. So that I'm differentiating the jobs. Because if I just do one at a time, if I just assemble one start to finish at a time, it's really inefficient for me because I'm having to change processes and tools and everything. If I'm doing all my handles, and they might be like 4 different styles or 8 different styles of handle, the processes are all the same. I know where I'm going to be scratching things off. I know the tools that I'm going to need. Whereas if I'm trying to like put on the gauges and the little filler spots and the spout, all those take different tools, and then it becomes a table full of a mess that doesn't make any sense and I can't find anything. So differentiating stuff into jobs helps. The damp boxes mean the parts that I have made are exactly the way I put them in there for indefinite amount of time. So if something does happen, I could put all my stuff into damp boxes and suspend them at that time. So let's say this week my truck dies and I need to like spend time at the dealership and all that crap, which just happened. That I can put them in the damp box and then know that when I can get to them, they will be exactly the way I need them to be. So I'm not like stressing out and again making bad decisions. They're just the way I need them. So yeah, I go through little cycles, through the week and then through each pot. So do you want to like the nitty gritty on assembly kind of stuff or just that process?
I think that process was
that's what really, you were shooting for.
Yeah, that process was really good. I love that.
And then at the end, like usually by the end of the day, and I know what it feels like when I'm starting to make decisions based on my time rather than based on the pot. And if it gets towards the 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon there, and I'm just making decisions that I feel like because I've got I want to be done before dinner, that I'll just bin it up. Like I'll just put it away and then come back maybe after dinner or in the morning so that I'm not making decisions based on my time. I'm making decisions based on what's best for the pot. So typically I'll leave all my little fiddly bits, like all these kind of things that are like just not drudgery, but like are really fiddly. Like it takes time to get these little things and they're not functional. They're all more like the decoration or motif of the work. I save them to the very end and I give myself a little bit of a break. Right now, a little bit of the break. And then I can go back and be like, okay, let's figure out what is the best thing for the pot. And that's the last little fiddly bits that take a pot from like, that's a good pot to like, that's a really good pot. And sometimes it's knowing not to put any fiddly bits on too. So, now is that time frame where I'm going to take those pots that are still, in the damp closet and stuff and pull them out one by one and go, okay, does this deserve a fiddly bit? Does it need a fiddly bit? Are the fiddly bits the right size and scale for the pots that I have? And I'll go through one by one and make sure I've got my name on it because that's really frustrating. Make sure my name is on it. Make sure they're sealed and, they're not going to leak or anything. And then I just go through and make sure there's no boogers and noise and get all that stuff done. And then it's like, okay, now it's done and it's in the drying stage. And then it just goes back on a board, back into the damp box until it's stiff enough to hold itself together with a sheet. And then it goes under the sheet for a bit. Like if I was able to pan around, you'd see boards covered with little sheets all over the place right now because nothing's drying really well. And then after the drying, I just put them right in the kiln. Like they don't stay on a shelf or anything because I load it. And then after the bisque firing, I sort them into bins, big tub type things. And if there's things that need illustration and stuff afterwards, they go in one bin. If there's things that just need to be glazed, they go in another. And then when it comes to the wood firing, I'll pull out bin by bin what needs to happen next and do those, so that I'm not, again, it's differentiation of process. So if I illustrate everything at once, I get good cohesive stories that build upon, the previous pieces. If I break it up and I illustrate 8 when I'm doing them and then another 8 later on, it's like, well, why did I do that again? Or what? Whereas I'm doing 60 at a time, it's like that robot is going through the storyline almost like a comic strip, and everything is happening, and I can always go back and I can fill in or add stuff to it, but getting that base down cohesively, and it's through maybe 40, 50 pieces that it's happening over, but it helps differentiate enough that it helps separate. It helps to separate those so that it's, I don't know what the right word is. It just makes it work more. That having them all ready to go, I'm not inhibited by anything. I'm not waiting for something to dry. They're already bisqued. All I have to do is illustrate. And I usually do that on, live. So people are watching and participating as I do it. And I can just, almost, I don't want to say zone out, because I'm any kind of I'm not zoning out and kind of not paying attention to what I'm doing. It's that I'm hyper focused on what I'm doing. And I can't get to that point without storing it all up. My phone is a little collection of story ideas. So I have I hit, take a note, and then I'll put down what happened in my yard. Pile of bird heads I just hit with a lawnmower because the hawks ate a bunch of my bird friends. That's going to be in a story, because I'm going to go through my little list. I'm going to put it on a piece of paper so I don't have to open up my phone every time. I'm going to put it on a little list, and that's going to be part of the story somehow. And if I had to separate that, or if I had to do it right when the pots are, ready that first time, it just doesn't work as well.
I love that. I love
Okay.
that so much. Shapy Nation, if you have a lot of things that you need to do, break it up into sections and then assemble it later all at once. So that way it keeps everything a little bit easier for yourself and you don't get a little bit mixed up. I love that so much.